I'm Jamie from Red Dutchess Farm. I'm from Southern Illinois, and I'm in Wanda's kitchen today, and I'm going to be making some homemade mozzarella cheese from our cow's milk. And so far, what I've done is I've gone through and pulled some cream. So we've got it for the coffee, butter, whatever. But I don't want to use all of it because I want to have enough to do this. So I start out with 2 gallons of fresh milk and just add it to the pot. The key is you want to use stainless steel all the time. I did not pull all the cream off as I make a mess. Once I get all the milk in, we're going to turn this on, and our first temperature that we want to hit is 55 degrees. We've had this in the cooler for a couple days because we brought it with us. About 41. Okay, and what we'll just do is I'll just stand here and stir it until it gets up to 55. Okay, the reason we sit here and stir the cheese or stir the milk before it's made into cheese is just to keep it blended well. You keep your cream in there and you keep it from scalding on the bottom of the pan. Because we're heating it fairly quickly to a certain point before we turn it down. So you just don't want it to stick, and you don't want the cheese to cream to ball up on you. Okay, the milk has reached 55 degrees. I gotta quit stirring that. What I have here is 3 teaspoons of citric acid. And we just sprinkle that around in there. Don't really want to just throw it in all in one big wad. And then we just stir this up. Make sure our heat's set on medium high. And we're gonna bring this, we're gonna stand here basically and stir it constantly, slowly. And it's going to start to firm up a little bit more, not a whole lot. And once it hits 80 degrees, then we're going to turn the temperature down a little bit, bring it to 90 before we do our next step. Okay, we have already hit the 80 degree mark. I turned it from high medium to medium, let it slowly rise to 90. And you can start to see little, just from the citric acid, you can start to see little curds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off the heat. I have a half a teaspoon of organic vegetable rennet mixed in a half a cup of cool water. We add this kind of in a flowy pattern. Once again, not all at one time, and you'll see why here in just a minute. And I'll show you what kind of rennet I use in a minute. Now, instead of stirring, I'm going to move this off the heat. And instead of stirring, we now just do the up and down method. As I start to do it, all of a sudden, it will start to set up and you'll see it on the spoon. This opens up the air and lets it start firming without the agitation of stirring it. If you start stirring it, you just break things down and it just doesn't work well. And that's on this type of cheese. It's a little bit different on each kind. This is just a plain mozzarella. As you can see, it's starting to stick and slide a little bit. Now, if you get a really good look now around the spoon, see where it's going in? How it actually looks almost like a pudding texture on top. That's what you want. You just mix it around just a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll take it and we'll set it off the heat where we've got it, cover it with a lid. See how it's sticking on there? And let it sit for 5 minutes. And what that will do is it'll just sit there and it's going to start forming the cheese down into the bottom of the pan, and the whey is going to start coming up. Now, for anybody who doesn't understand the whey is it's the watery liquid that comes out of the milk. And a lot of people think, well, once you get the whey, you can't do anything with it. You can do a lot of things with it. Mark then takes the process further, and he makes ricotta cheese. So if you like ricotta cheese for your lasagnas or whatever, you just start using the whey for that. Otherwise, if you don't, you can take it and just feed it to your chickens. Chickens like it, cats like it, and it's really good for them. So there's no waste in it, actually. It's been 5 minutes. So as you can tell, you can see some separation. Sometimes when you do this, you'll see lots of clear liquid on top. Sometimes you'll see a little bit. So now what we do is just cut it. And we just make squares. All this does is opens it up and makes giant curds. Okay, so now what I have here is just the curds, and I'm gonna put the leave the lid off of it, and I'm gonna turn this back up, and we're gonna run this up to 100 degrees. Now we're sitting at, let's see what we're sitting at. Get my arm out of the way. Yeah, keeps climbing. Yeah, 92. So it's not gonna take too long. And I'll just very slowly, basically kind of just shift it. So you can see it's kind of firm in there. And all I'm doing is keeping it from sticking to the bottom of the pan. So while I'm doing that, I have the citric acid I use for this process is just regular citric acid. I actually get mine from a friend of mine that owns a winery because he gets it in such bulk. The rennet that I use, and that's what causes this to form, is organic vegetable rennet. And it is gluten-free for anybody who's gluten-free. And that way anybody who uses it doesn't eat pork or is vegetarian or whatnot, this works for them. And personally, I like it. I think it lasts a little bit longer in the fridge. So now we just kind of move it around a little bit until it hits 100 degrees, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, we've hit 100, and as you can see in the pan, you've got this nice slimy gelatin looking cheese going on here. And we're going to shut off the power, and we're going to go over to the sink where I have the strainer and cheesecloth. The main goal of this is we're just to let this sit here and drain, and for just a couple of minutes, and try to get as much of this liquid out of this as you can. You can kind of pick it up, because sometimes if your pan underneath is maybe not deep enough or whatever, you see it's just going to sit there and run out. And that's our thing right now, is our pan needs to be empty. Now we're just going to let this sit here and drain for a couple minutes, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it around a little bit. It feels really funny, so I'll cut it, and it'll cause the whey to continue getting it out of there. And I'm going to take this back to the stove, turning this back up, and we're going to let this whey get up to about 150 to 170 degrees. And this is the hard part. Once it gets to this point, then that's when we will start using this to form the mozzarella. We'll start stretching and everything. So, yes, I realize people wear gloves for this process. I, however, do not. So it is extremely hot. And so I would recommend anybody wear gloves. I have no feeling in my hands, so it doesn't matter. So what we're doing right now is we have the cheese itself sitting there draining in the cheesecloth. And this is the whey that is left over. And this needs to be about 150 to 170 degrees. So we're just bringing it up to that temperature. What we'll do with this is what we will dip the cheese into to start forming it and stretching it. It is extremely hot, obviously, and yes, I should have gloves on, but I don't work with gloves on it. So just be careful at this point that you take precautions, because you will see here in a minute how you actually have to get in here and work with this hot. So we're at 145 degrees. I want at least another 10 degrees before I start working with it. So we just wait now and keep stirring until it's up there. We've taken this cheese and cut it in half. So this makes 2 balls. And then I just kind of work it out of here. It's a little wet still. A little wetter than usual, but The difference in the milk makes a difference all the time. It's never the same twice. Squeeze a little of that out of there. This is where I have to clean up the kitchen afterwards, because we go from here to the stove. Okay, ready? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start dumping. I've got a decent little ball, firm ball. I'm going to start dumping this in here. And then just kind of work it. It'll take a few minutes for it to start forming together. Yeah, see, it's starting to do a little bit stretchier. The hotter it gets, the more I work it. It'll start to ball together. I do okay on the first ball. The second ball starts getting really hot feeling. And you just kind of work it until it starts, see, it's starting to form this rubbery. This is what you want. Now, at any point that you want to add flavors, sometimes I'll add rosemary, I'll add, basil, anything like that. You can do that in the step right before. I don't personally like to add it when I add the rennet, because it doesn't take anything at all to mess up the forming process. And then you have this big lump of nothing. Now, normally this will form a little faster. It'll be fine. I will at this point go ahead and fess up to why it's forming a little slower. As I was talking to Wanda, which we do quite well, I grabbed the salt instead of the citric acid. So instead of putting the citric acid in right off the bat, I put the salt in. So it slowed the process down just a little bit. And that's why it's taking a little bit longer at this stage to get that rubbery look that I'm wanting. So yeah, that was the boo-boo. But that goes to show you that it still will work if you screw up and put them in the wrong order. You can see it's starting to really, it kind of gets, it actually is very hard to pull at this stage. And you get this all over the stove. So I'll have to scrub the stove off when I'm done. Now, the longer you work the cheese, the more firm it's going to get. So if you want a really super firm cheese, you just keep working it. It's also going to be a lot harder to work. But see how it's starting to shine? You're starting to get that shine to it. That's what you want. That is mozzarella. We've got it to this point where it's starting to get shiny and it's getting stretchy. I need to add some salt. Now, it doesn't matter how much salt you put in this cheese, in this mozzarella, it's not going to be what you would call salty. It just, for some reason, it just cooks out. You can put salt in your whey and let it work in, but I have not managed yet to get a, what we call a salty mozzarella. So now that I've got all that salt, I'm just gonna pretty much start forming it. Now, if you don't get your salt worked in, what's gonna happen is when your cheese sets up and you cut it, you're gonna see it's gonna look like little air bubbles. Well, they're not actually bubbles, it's salt. And so if your salt doesn't dissolve in there properly, which is not gonna hurt a thing unless you're going for pretty cheese, you're gonna see those little dark spots. It's not a big deal, it's just cheese with salt. But as you'll notice, this, as opposed to the other lump of cheese I did, see how it wants to pull apart a little bit more? That's the added salt. So you have to really work this. It sometimes doesn't stay as smooth because that salt tends to want to separate it a little bit. But once it dries. Okay, I've been pulling on this cheese 2-3 minutes. Till I get the texture that I'm wanting and the slickness. Now, you'll see that right now I have like little peels. That would be from the reversal of salt and citric acid, but it's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter. So now what I've done is I've just made it into a ball, and we have ice water sitting over here. You just take it over, drop it down in the ice water. Now, we'll let this sit there for, while I start working on the other one. Randomly, we'll just flip this around, whatever. What the ice water does is it starts quick cooling, and it will keep the cheese in the ball. If you just put this out here and you put it into, lay it on the counter and let it cool, it's gonna be a pancake. And it's great for making cheese sticks, however. And if you put it into some little container, it'll take the form of that container, which is really kind of awesome too, except for it's really hard to get out of the containers. So we just sit there, and now we're ready to work the second ball. Okay, the whole time we've been working on this second ball of cheese, our first one has been sitting in the soap in the cold water, and you can see it's taken its shape, and it's nice and firm. It's still warm in there. They say to stick it in for about an hour. I never do. I get it put in a Ziploc baggie and put it in the refrigerator. But had I not reversed the salt and the citric acid by accident, this would have been perfectly smooth. The only thing that process did was just made it a little bit, you know, your layers, you see your layers, which you have in mozzarella anyway. It's just you see them more. Doesn't affect the taste. It didn't affect how it's set up and worked. Just affected how smooth it ended up being. So now we will just sit here and do the 2 balls and let them cool, and they will be ready to eat.